Welcome back, everyone, and welcome Ian, my co-host.
I
or
love what you've done with the place while I've been gone. It looks fabulous.
It's a little different. I've got my plant camouflaging the messy desk back there, trying to gussy the place up a little bit.
We
So
would we would never have noticed if you hadn't said something.
that's
So
true.
yeah,
Um, all right. So you did not get into your first choice college.
I certainly
And
didn't.
And you know what? A lot of students, as much as because you're my colleague, I probably will mock you for this. I promise I would never do that to a current student. And actually, a lot of students might be going through this soon. I mean, you
Yeah,
reach for these incredibly selective schools. There's a good chance, honestly. I mean, every day, I'm sure you're with me. I have conversations with families who are like, "Should I apply to Stanford?" And I'm like, "Well, it depends on what your criteria is for choosing colleges that you want to apply to.
that's right.
If you want to apply to schools that you're likely to get into, then no, you should not apply to
That's
Stanford.
right.
Not
That's
because you're
absolutely
not
right.
great, not because you're not great, but like probably you're not getting in, no matter how kind of amazing you are. And I talked to some truly amazing students. And even with them, the best thing I can say to them is you will be taken seriously in the committee room.
That's right.
I'm like, that's the best I can say. And then
I'm
you
not sure
will
if I was.
still probably be denied. like,
That's
yeah,
right. That's
yeah.
right.
So,
And
yeah, so go ahead.
Well, I think the criteria, that's really important to think about. And I don't think that I spent a lot of time thinking about that when I was in high school. I was a pretty good high school student. I was in the top 3% of my class. I was the concert master of the orchestra. I played on the baseball team. I did lots of service. I was involved in almost everything, right? So from a local view, I felt like, oh, wow, I've really got a shot for these schools.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have anybody advising me or sort of saying, well, here's what the applicant pool actually looks like. And so I just sort of figured, well, what are the best schools? I'm going to apply to a bunch of those. And I've seen that they admit about 10% of their applicants. I'm going to apply to about 10 of them. And that means I'll get into one, right? So like my
How is it that
philosophy,
even the smartest students don't understand statistics?
yeah, well, I never taken a statistics class, unfortunately. And so I totally missed that. And
Mm-hmm.
the results came back in a way that definitely showed that I didn't really understand what I was doing. I think it's also fair to say that I really liked Pomona. Pomona was my first choice. I went over, I visited. I think I would have been a good fit for Pomona. But a lot of the other schools I applied to mostly on name recognition. Harvard, Stanford, Northwestern, Georgetown, UC Berkeley, Dartmouth. I applied to all of those schools without really having visited them or even knowing much about them. And actually, Sally, when I went and visited Stanford, I walked around campus and was just kind of like, this is too big. Like, I don't get it. But it still was at the top of my list for whatever reason. I only happened to apply to Reed because my dad, who's a college professor, recommended it to me. He just like, Reed's a really cool school. You should apply there. And so I figured, all right, well, I'll throw it on my list just to sort of see what happens. And Reed was the first school that I heard back from. And I got in. And that was still in the old days where we were notified with the big envelope and I opened it up and Reed puts confetti on the inside. And so it came flying out. And I was like, all right, great. Well, this will be the first of many, and sort of put it aside and didn't even really celebrate that
The
I'd gotten into the
arrogance
school.
of youth.
Totally, 100%. And so then the skinny envelopes started arriving one after another from these schools. And it was just, unfortunately or regretfully or, whatever. And so it started to become clearer and clearer that, I'm down to really three choices here if I don't want to go to one of my in-state institutions, which my mom had forbidden me from choosing. She sort of said, you need to leave the state to go out and have a college adventure. So that was tough. I mean, it was really, really hard. I think for somebody who had been successful in most contexts in my high school career, this was the first time that there had been a sort of referendum on what I could create, what I could produce. And I felt like I had failed. And one of the things that I really point to for students that was a challenge for me in this context was I felt like I wasn't actively choosing the school I wanted to go to, that I was sort of stuck with leftovers. I was kind of like, okay, here's what's left. You can go to Reed, or you can go to UC San Diego or UC Santa Barbara. I got into those schools as well, and they're great schools. But because of so many schools had denied me, I just felt really bad about how the process had gone. And that really still lingers with me. It's part of why I got into college admission in the beginning, to begin with, because I thought it was such an interesting process.
So how did you kind of manage to turn it around and start to celebrate the institutions that you got into? Or did that not really happen until you got to college?
It was hard. I mean, I think my mom took me up to visit Reed in April. And I think at that point, I was on the wait list at Dartmouth and still thought that there was a possibility there. But as you and I know now, that's really unrealistic. And so I was sort of evaluating Reed with this sort of resignation, like a sense of, okay, well, here's where I'm going. And so I found things about the school that I liked, and they tended to really sort of center on the classes that I was able to observe as a student there. The lecture that I went to, Steve Arkanovich, who actually became my advisor later on, was giving this great lecture on philosophy and religion, and asked this question of whether God could create a stone so heavy that he himself could not lift it. And how that is a test for God, because there's either way, there's something he can't do. Either he can't create the stone because he can lift anything, or he creates the stone and then he can't lift it. And so it was this really interesting question that was sort of presented in a way that I hadn't really seen in high school. And that's what got me, I think, most excited about starting school at Reed in the fall. But it really took a long process over the summer of registering for housing and starting to get communications, where I finally felt like when I was leaving to go to school, that I was looking forward to it. So it was not the dream scenario that I think a lot of high school students consider.
Well, and I think one of the things that happens with a lot of students, and it seems clear that this became part of the process for you, is that they do feel like it's a referendum on their worth as a person, which it really isn't, at all. I mean, not being able to get into schools that at that level of selectivity says nothing about who you are. And frankly, we can all point to numerous examples of people who didn't get into schools like that. Warren Buffett not getting into Harvard is one of my favorite ones. And then, by the way, going to UPenn and leaving and going back to University of Nebraska didn't really hurt him. I think he's done pretty well for himself. He's doing okay. But this sense that it's a referendum on your worth instead of just kind of a next stage and what's going to be the right place for you. So, would you say that was part of it for you, or
that was a huge part of it? I mean, it was hard for me to come to grips with that. And I mean, I definitely had some arrogance. Like when I look back at my college essay, I'm sort of like, oh, I can't believe I wrote that. Like it wasn't great. It was about how I loved to debate with my friends and how some of my other friends thought it was weird that we were always arguing. I mean, I love that. And it actually pointed the way toward Reed quite a bit, because we like to talk so much about interesting ideas. But, because I was somebody that was so confident, it was a big surprise. And I think that the thing that I really did wrong, Sally, I was done with all of my applications by about the first week of October. I was so excited to apply to college. I had the stamped envelopes for my recommenders. I had every supplement written. I was just so excited to do it. I also really didn't consult with anyone about the process. It was very much my own. My parents trusted me to do it. I didn't have people look at my essays. I just sort of went for it and felt really confident in what I was sharing. And I think if I had had even one conversation with my college counselor that was sort of like, what do you think about my list? What do you think about my essay? I might have had an entirely different approach just from one conversation. And so that's really where I feel like I made the biggest mistake, was in not consulting with others. And so people who are listening to this radio show, they're already, taking the advice of us and listening to what we have to offer. And so I think you're already in a better position than I was when I was applying to college.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I did right was I talked about my list with my AP US history teacher, who was my favorite teacher, hands down. That was my favorite class in high school. He knew me really well, and he was one of my recommenders. And I came in and I said, what do you think about Reed? It looks really interesting to me. And he's like, that's like the perfect school for you, Sally.
Awesome.
And it was really interesting too, because he had gone to Berkeley and he basically most of the time told everybody to go to Berkeley. And he was like, I really think Reed is more the place for you.
That's great.
And like, I didn't have a high school my high school counselor was great, but she was totally overwhelmed. She had hundreds and hundreds of students, many of whom had real problems, like dropping out of college, not, do I apply to these, which fancy schools do I apply to? And so she just wasn't like a great option, but and I bring this story up because I think a lot of people listening are like, well, my high school counselor doesn't have time for me. I don't know her. Use the other adults in your life.
That's
Talk to that trusted teacher,
That's exactly
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can talk to teachers that you trust. You can ask for their perspective. Just talking to other adults who family, friends. I think going beyond as a teenager, somebody asks you, hey, are you working on your college applications? You sometimes want to really shut that conversation down and move into the next room. Mm-hmm. But you can learn a lot from other adults about, what their process looked like, kids that they know who went through this process, things that they've learned about it. You don't want to take everything that, the neighbor says as gospel, as we've talked about on this show many times. Mm-hmm. But I do think that just having more perspective from people can really, really be helpful as you go through it. And my sort of stroke of luck was that my dad recommended Reed. I mean, I honestly don't know how it even came across our radar. It might've been just a mailing that they sent, but it was so unusual relative to the other schools that were on my list. I mean, Pomona and Reed were the only two small liberal arts college I applied to. I really wish I'd applied to Whitman and Carleton and, even Williams. Like, it would have been great to have considered those options as well, but I missed it.
It worked out though, I think.
What's that?
I think it worked out though. Yeah.
And that's what that's a great sort of, I grew into Reed. I mean, it was a place that was not, I didn't show up there and instantly loved it. It really took time for me to warm to the place. Part of what caused that to happen was that I found the Ultimate Frisbee team and started playing with them and made a lot of friends instantly just by being a part of that team. So that gave me an anchor. It gave me something to look forward to through the weeks. I really enjoyed my classes thoroughly. And so that was a huge part for me. And then when I was a senior and I worked in the admission office, I had to, whenever I was giving a tour, talking to a student, talk about only the positive things at school. And so that affected my perspective of the place, because I was saying, oh yeah, this great thing happened, or I'll tell you about this story from the other day. And that sort of just my perspective on thinking about the school really changed for the better. In many ways, it can be just how you look at it, how you consider your experience that can affect how you feel about your school.
Right. Are you focusing on the negative, or are you focusing on the positive things that are happening? You can focus on the one negative, grade that you got on your paper, or you can focus on the great conversations that you are having with your friends. I want to stress too that, you can get into your first choice and also be unhappy and not warm to it immediately. Right. I mean, I think what you talk about, joining the Ultimate Frisbee team, that's important even at your first choice college,
That's right.
I mean, it's kind of amazing how often, I used to work with transfers. You and I both went to Reed. I worked with transfers when I worked in the admission office at Reed before you even applied. But when I worked with the transfers, it was really notable how many of them had sort of initially thought that they wanted a huge school, and they'd transfer from, UC Berkeley, UCLA, University of Michigan, or something like that. Or maybe they'd gone to college across the country and realized that they really missed that kind of Portland vibe. They were a Portlander, and they're I need the Portland vibe, so these are people who'd gotten into their first choice, and then it just wasn't the right place for them when it came right down to it. It wasn't that they couldn't do the work. I mean, we were admitting them, so they were getting good grades. That wasn't an issue, but you have to make it work for you.
There's something to that idea as well of sort of how you come to have a first choice or a ranked list of priorities. I mean, when I got into Reed and UC San Diego and UC Santa Barbara, my initial thought on the UCs was, those are too big. I don't think I could see myself there. And that's such a silly thing to have realized in March of my senior year. It's why didn't I think about that back in November when I was applying to those schools? And so I think sometimes students don't go through this process of really thinking about, why am I applying to this place? Why is this school on my list? Do I really want to be a student there? You've got to have that conversation with yourself before you apply. And if you don't, you're going to have it later after you get in. So you might as well sort of think really realistically about what the best kind of fit institution is going to be for you from the front end. I think that's a really important question to ask.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks so much, Ian. We've run out of time.
Thank you very much, Sally. It was fun.
All right. And thanks to Chrissy Ferran and Lauren Randall. Be sure to join us for our show next week. We'll be covering the essay supplements for Georgia Tech and UGA, and the non-essay but still very important parts of the Common Application, like the activity list, etc. Cool. And remember, if you have questions about a particular topic, we may have already covered it. So to find a particular show's broadcast date, please do go to our blog page at blog.getintocollege.com. You can search for blogs there, getting in show summaries there, etc. And then last, don't forget, we're here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. So check us out.